This is episode 206 of the Leadway Wealth Builders Podcast, and today I'm breaking down what I've been doing for the past 6 months, and we had been working on buying a business. However, we were one day away from signing documents, and the sellers had backed out after we had agreed upon terms. We had the documents just about drawn up, and they backed out last minute. So I want to break down that whole ordeal from beginning to end, and for you guys to be able to kind of see what we've been working on in the background for the past couple of months. But if you've never listened to this podcast before, my name is Chris Reichenbach, and this is the Leadway Wealth Builders Podcast, and I am documenting my journey in real estate and business, and also bringing on high-level entrepreneurs to share their stories about how they built their businesses. You can follow me and my journey on social media at chris.reichenbach. That's chris.reichenbach. And if you want to stay updated on this podcast, make sure you give it a follow and interact with us. Let us know who you want to be listening to, any interesting people, interesting topics, and I'm more than happy to reach out to different people to have them on. So thank you so much for listening, but let's hop into today's topic here. So I want to break this down from kind of beginning to end here. And if you've been following the podcast, I had Gideon Spencer on just about, I want to say 6 months ago. And me and him had a really cool conversation, as well as after the episode was done. And he talked about thinking bigger and thinking about, well, it's easier to make $1 million than it is to make 100,000, because the thing that you're going to chase after to make $1 million is going to make 100,000 super easy. So it's better to be able to go after that bigger thing, which is going to accomplish your goals. And he gets into that on the podcast that you should go back and listen to. But, it really got me thinking. And I said, okay, well, do I want to go into hotels? Do I want to buy small businesses? So I just started, looking around on Crexy, running some numbers, and reaching out to some brokers just on the side. And what we did was, I contacted a couple hotels, and then I saw this one about 2.5 hours away, and turns out there wasn't a boutique hotel there, but they said it was the opportunity to have one. And I said, okay, well, I'll still, walk the venue, had a really good conversation and meet, and they said, oh, this is a wedding venue. And I'm like, interesting. I'm like, I hadn't really thought of that before, but I said, okay, well, if event venues and boutique hotels kind of, they still do some of the same things if they have the right space. And this one had the ability to build a boutique hotel on the side. I said, okay, well, let me just look at wedding venues now that I know the type of numbers that they can make, and they can make really solid numbers if you do it right. So I started looking around, and I just did a quick Facebook search and actually found 2 that were being sold by the same person. So I said, okay, let's set up a call. Let's go through it. And he said, yeah, I got one over here, and then I got one I'm working on. So I said, let's just go walk both of them. And so we ended up really liking the one because it was completely done. We would have been able to take over operations and hadn't really discussed any of the finances on day one, except kind of what they were looking for on the purchase price and some seller financing terms. So I said, okay, well, after viewing both of them, we said on the one, I said, let me just look into some numbers and see what we could possibly do here. And then I started doing the homework. And then the homework and multiple meetings with the sellers, we were able to kind of figure out where the ballpark is on what they were making, and said, okay, hey, I think I want to get you an LOI on this. Let's start looking. They were, a little bit more laid back. They weren't looking to actually sell the business, go through the LOIs, the attorneys, but I'm so glad we did, as you'll, kind of follow along in the story, because we got into the negotiations and said, okay, well, what are you guys actually making? There wasn't any financials documented very well. There was some cash being distributed, and, they were using for tax write-offs. So, going through that, it just really muddied the water. But I said, for me, that's exactly what I'm looking for. As long as I can see you're booking this venue and we can kind of tie back the numbers to it, that makes sense to me. But, going through the attorneys, we need to have everything documented. And that's where we started to kind of find some hiccups, and that's where it got a little bit rough, because for the seller financing, I was looking to put as little down as possible to nothing. And I said, the least amount that I can bring in and, have an investor come in is going to be the best for me. So, we finally got to some terms and said, okay, this is what we want down. Here's what has to be paid off on the original note. And then this is what we want to walk away with. And you're good to go, start operating. So from those terms, I started looking around, started meeting some other investors that were, interested in what I was doing, and ended up finding some really cool investors and found a private money lender or two. And basically from there, we had the deeper conversations. We had the lunch meetings, and the one was super interested. And I said, let's go walk it. I really just want to hear your feedback. And this was around the time when we said, well, the sellers want this really high price, but the attorneys are telling me that it's probably not worth that or even close to it. So I didn't want to pay for an appraisal. So we got the sellers to be able to do that. So during this time when we walked with the investor, they're like, hey, this is not even remotely close to what they think it's worth. This isn't the deal for me. So that, killed my side on the investors, because I'm like, all right, it's impossible for me to bring in investors. We don't know exactly what they're making, but we have the history of them having this booked out venue, and they turned off the marketing about 6 months ago and just haven't been accepting people in, except, people who go out and reach out to them. So they already have a name in the space. They have bookings for the next year. So we know there's something there. We see the opportunity in it, and that's why I kept pursuing it, because the whole, reason I was looking into this was the active income. We saw the boutique hotels that, were going to be a little bit more passive and in chunks. So we'd get paid on the purchase, we'd get paid on the refinance, and then we'd get paid when we sell it. But there wasn't much active income in the ones that we were looking at. So this is why we said, my wife's looking to get out of nannying. What's this next step for us? And even though it was a big pivot to be able to switch industries from the real estate side into the hospitality side, they're a little bit side by side. So we just wanted active income coming in to be able to, just take care of us. So did this venue fit that? Yes. It would have taken a little bit to be able to, get rolling, but we knew the bones were there to be able to go ahead and start. So at this point in the story, we walk it with the investor. They pretty much turn it down. And, just so you guys know, I'm going through how we found it, negotiating, and all the way through the end here. And then I want to go through, what went right and what could have been better, and kind of what we learned through this ordeal. So back to the story here, to where, the investor's out, and we sit down with them one more time after the appraisal came in really high that, even the sellers were like, I don't think that's right. So, now we have a high appraisal that we don't think is right. And I said, all right, guys, let's sit down one more time. Like, we have to make a decision here. So we met again. We had about a 2-hour meeting, and we got pretty deep into it. And about with 20 minutes left, I started realizing some of the numbers we were throwing around, and realizing like, these numbers don't work. Like, we're not going to be able to make money here. And through all these terms and this, and I pretty much blew that up right there. And I said, okay, look, guys, I have 20 minutes because I have to go show this rental. You guys have to come to a decision. Here's my number. Here's what I can do. Or I have to walk and, move on. Like, I'm done. So we took our time, and they came back and said, okay, just move this number and make it a little bit higher, and we're good to go. So I am being a little bit vague with numbers because of the deal, and I don't, it's just to protect the sellers. But I said everybody looked good. We liked the terms. Basically, what we were going to be doing was taking over the operations on the venue, and we were going to be able to build the clean books, and we were going to be able to do a refinance and a purchase at the set purchase price in 3 years whenever we had clean books. So we know we could have done that in about 2 to 3 years, right around that range, whenever the books were clean and we had bookings showing there was income coming in. So, everything was good. looked me in the eye, shook my hand, said, hey, we're good to go on this. Let's do it. We're not going to change our terms. And then we had the attorneys start drafting the documents. So about a week and a half later, I even got on a call. It was on a Thursday, and we had a call with the attorneys and said, just need to clarify a couple things. We're going to write it up like this. I said, okay, that's good. And an hour later, I get a text from the seller saying, hey, thank you for your interest in purchasing, but we're going a different route. I'm cashing out this person, and I'm going to go ahead and run it myself. Completely going back on what we had done and what we were going to do. And they had done that to me 2 or 3 times during this whole ordeal. And, it was like a big gut punch because we were ready to go. I had put tons of hours and studying and, working to be able to get to this point. And we were finally ready to take it over as soon as those documents were done, which was going to be later that day or the next day. So really big gut punch for us, and, really tough to deal with, but it wasn't like a sad feeling because I feel like, God's going to kind of show us in that way, and God's delays are not God's denials. And that's something that I've, read from Brian Lubin's book and Tony Robbins' book. And, just being able to, listen to that and going, hey, at least this is a sign that's pushing us in one direction. It's not the end of the world. We still have wholesaling going on for us. And look at all of what we did to be able to get to this point and just be able to learn about these different businesses and how they're valued and how everything goes. So, but yeah, we had some really good seller financing terms that was going to be able to let us build the business and have the active income that we were looking for to support ourselves and just kind of grow that nest egg. And so now I want to get to the part where, this was the big part for us. So what we had to do based on how they were running the business as a wedding venue was they cut off marketing. So there was very little bookings to be able to go off of, except for what they've done in the past 2 years when they did turn on the marketing. So we were using those numbers for our pro forma, which is showing like, hey, this is what we're expecting to make in the next 2 to 3 years. So we built out a 2 to 3 year pro forma. We said, hey, we know this is going to be about our cap, which is about, probably 400,000 to 500,000. And if you've ever read Profit First, this is where we started really, dialing in what numbers we have to be at for the business, because in the early stages of negotiating, I said, okay, well, I can give you this purchase price, I can give you this monthly. And then after going through it, I was able to see like, this doesn't work because our monthly payments are going to be extremely high. We're going to be making no money. But if you were able to scale to 2 venues and have a manager, then you could have hired somebody for about $60,000 to $70,000 a year to manage both of those venues, and that's where the business actually made sense. So it would have been extremely hands-on and not very profitable with one venue. However, if you were able to scale that up to 2 or 3, that's where the business really makes sense. So we knew this was an easy entry point for us to be able to get in, start making money, and then, look for that second venue within 6 months to a year. So, with that change in how much money you were making on the top line revenue, we were going to still be making the same for me and my wife, but it lets your operations be able to grow because you can spend more money on it. And that's where we just needed the time delay to be able to build up that one venue to where it was a consistent income stream of about $30,000 a month. And that was going to be taking care of us in that specific venue. And once you scale to 2, that's where you have all of that kind of leftover income that, you're prioritizing in different ways, whether it's your owner's pay, your tax, your operating expenses, and your profit. So that's where you're really going to be able to see, the profitability of your business. So we knew we had to get the one venue to at least $350,000 operating ourselves. But once we scaled to 2, we completely went into a different category to where we needed to be spending more on the operations. And that fit with 2 to 3 venues, but it didn't with 1. So we knew our goal was to scale and set it up so that we were the operations and management company rather than just one sole operator and venue. So that was our goal. And we were really heading in that direction until, they blew it up at the last minute. So I want to talk about, what went wrong here, and then I'll get into what went right. So what could have been better is, the deal failed because I wasn't able to bring my own money to the table. I had to bring in an investor, and that was something to where if I was able to bring in $100,000 to $200,000, we would have been in this deal, and it would have been a lot different conversation and probably smooth sailing. But because I wasn't able to do that and had to bring in an investor for it, it really, it was tough because that means the owners are, walking away with basically nothing and hoping to get paid off at that angle. So seeing it from their side, they want money right away to be able to show that I'm a serious buyer. But for me, I was having to bring in an investor with that cash. And then there was a third party in it who said, hey, if they get cash, we need paid off. So it just didn't work unless we just brought them everything in a cash offer. And then you get into, well, we don't even think this is worth this. So on the appraisal, so it really got tough there at the end on the money side. And that was one thing that, really failed on my part. If I was able to bring money to the table, we would have been looking at that. But when I look at the bigger picture is, hey, if we had money, would we even be looking at this type of business? Which is another interesting thing to look at. So if we were able to get in with no money and start that operating income and be able to, just make money for ourselves, I think that would have, and I know that would have worked the way we wanted it to because we knew the number that we could bring in there. So, something that I would structure differently, the deal structure, I was able to walk through very different types of seller financing, different subject to opportunities, and just be able to really, look at it from all different perspectives, which was really good. But, the biggest thing that we had to be able to do was to structure it with low monthly payments, especially within that first year. So in the beginning, we were looking at stepped payments to where, hey, no payments for the first 6 months, but we would be paying you monthly after this. And it would grow every 6 months to a year because, we had to be able to come in with low monthly expenses to make this thing cash flow and to make sure we're paying ourselves. So that was step 1. And then we had to be able to say, okay, well, in 3 years, when we decide to, do a refinance on this, when would we, what is this cash out price? Because as we're adding more venues, as we're adding more bookings, that's going to increase the value. So we have to set a purchase price right now. And what they were wanting was just way too high for what they had done. They did a great job on, doing a whole renovation of the venue, but the problem is there was no bookings coming in. So you're asking somebody to come in with $1 million to $1.5 million just down. There was no way to be able to do that and make it cash flow unless you just had a pile of money sitting over there. Then you'd be looking at something completely different and saying, why? If you had that money, you probably wouldn't be looking at that type of business. So that's one of the bigger reasons, and it was just really tough to kind of get in the door. But once we got over that step to where we structured seller financing a couple different ways to have those low monthly payments, that's when it made sense for us. And so that's what we kept building on until they kept changing their minds. So here is what went right in the deal. So I was able to find it. I was able to look at multiple different businesses. I was able to go through profit first and figured out which numbers really matter. Like, how is this business actually going to cash flow? I ran it by different investors. I was raising money, talking to different investors, going through these different, different ideas and different viewpoints, and hey, what if this happens? What is this? Like, hey, if it doesn't produce, what's your plan? So you have plans A, B, and C, and that's when I was able to really see that, hey, this probably isn't gonna, it's probably gonna do okay on its own, but you're going to have to scale this thing to be able to make sure this is an actual business. And that's where, you get into the, hey, you're not just operating wedding venues, you're a hospitality management company, which is completely different. And going from there, it's like the venues are one thing, but you could have venues under this, you could have boutique hotels, and that's what I was really excited about building. And I felt like this was just the first foot in the door. So being able to go through all of this, and probably about month 4 or 5, I was able to kind of see that and go, okay, well, we can structure this completely differently. We don't need money to come in because, we're able to say, hey, if you give me 3 years, we can build this up to the point to where, we can purchase this outright, or we can do a DSCR refi on it and it'll make sense for us. But we just have to get through those first couple years. And that's what the sellers were good with until the one, who took a week and a half and, just had to run it by plenty of different people who weren't involved in the deal and, kind of blow it up. So also being able to go through this is just being able to understand that I can do this. I can communicate to sellers. I can structure deals. I can find the deal and put it all together to be able to get to the closing table. So I know this one wouldn't have looked really great for investors to come in. And, we saw that reaction pretty quickly when we were running through the numbers. And that's something that's super, super valuable because most people always just kind of look on Crexy or on LoopNet, but they never actually get to that step. So for me, I was able to come off that podcast with Gideon, and within a month, I was already walking different businesses and being able to see, okay, what works for me, what doesn't work for me, and, actually go through with working to get to the closing table on one with really interesting and creative seller financing terms. So that's what I'm super excited about because we know as we grow in this business, and when I say we, it's me and my wife, we know we're going to be able to put those deals together. And if we keep looking for those opportunities, then we know we're going to succeed. And right now, as we're wholesaling, we're having more opportunities come up. We just got under contract on another one over here. So that'll be the third one under contract for the year. We know that business is growing and it's just going to take a little bit of time. And to be so close on something and, that would have completely changed our lives, for the better or through lots of learning, we're super excited for the future and what that holds. And, just one more thing on went right is we were able to see the systems and processes. I was able to really go through what I found was interesting. And for me, what's really interesting is the systems and processes. I feel in the zone and, where I like to be is through the spreadsheets and seeing a business as a machine that's already moving and being able to see what can I tweak here on the balance sheet that affects me over on the top line revenue. How does that affect me on profit, owner's pay, operating expenses, and being able to go through that. So I really enjoy that part. So I know buying and owning businesses is going to be something that, I lean into more in the future, and that's where I should be. And I know it's something we're going to be going after more in the future. So we're working on just resetting right now and getting restabilized with wholesaling to be able to start being able to, if we have to put 100 or 200,000 into a business, we're going to be able to do that. So right now we're going to focus on wholesaling for the near future here, but we're always looking for that next business opportunity. So I hope you enjoyed listening to me ramble on for over 20 minutes here. Wow. But that's kind of what's going on behind the scenes and what we're really pushing for on the back end. But, wholesaling, I still see it as like a chunk and run business. And, it's not something until you get more cold callers and start really investing that it becomes this business. So, it's more just kind of for us to be able to reset, start flipping here, hopefully by the end of the year when we start building up a little bit of a cash pile. And then we'll be able to really get settled to start taking more of these swings like we just did. So thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Leadway Wealth Builders Podcast. We will be back again next week with, I think, is going to be another interview. We have some really cool people on the schedule coming up. So make sure you keep tuning in. We just had this whole event happen within the last week. So I just wanted to come on here and break down what all happened, what we went through, what went right, what went wrong, and what we're looking for in the future. So thank you so much for listening. This has been another episode of the Leadway Wealth Builders Podcast with me, Chris Reichenbach. I'll see you on the next one.